It's easy to say that the target language must be used at least 90% of the time in world language classrooms. Everyone understands that it will be used 100% of the time in the immersion classroom. The real challenge lies in making the language comprehensible when delivering lessons that are cognitively engaging for learners. This video will consider two key questions. Why is it so important to use the target language? And how do we make input comprehensible? Why is it important to use the target language? Language learning is a skill and must be practiced to be improved. Administrators, parents, and students understand this concept easily when talking about a sport or learning to play a musical instrument. Children improve in sports and music because they practice the skills on a regular basis. It's fairly easy to agree that a child becomes a better musician by playing consistently for many years. It makes sense that learners develop their language skills by using the language. They must be immersed in the language and must use the language as a means of communication. ACTFL recommends that educators use the language at least 90% of the time at all levels of instruction. The 90% plus gives educators a goal, a measure of best practice.
I actually learned that from Dr. Muller's methods class, and I think that works very well for target language use for language classrooms. I think because we're going to use 90% of the target language, and then sometimes we do have that necessity for the 10% to explain something, right? So when we're switching, we could use something like an English hat or English crown, so that you let the students know that that's a signal for switching back to English, and I'm going to explain something real quickly. And then when I take that off, students know that I'm going to switch back to Chinese. So I think that's a very good way to help the students, stay tuned in what you're going to do and what kind of language are you going to use.
To meet this goal, language teachers must believe that it is possible to use the target language in the classroom. They must not think that their language is too hard or feel that they have too much to cover to conduct their lessons in the target language. Even the kindergarten teacher who is working in the children's first language knows just how long it takes to explain the routine of lining up appropriately to students. What happens on day one sets the expectations for what will happen in future classes. If the teacher uses English, learners will expect and wait for the teacher to use English. Mimi Met, in Making Meaning in the Immersion Classroom, explains this clearly.
When introducing new words to your students, it's often tempting to use English to define new words or to explain complex concepts. Research on early immersion classrooms is very clear that language acquisition occurs best when students are immersed completely in the target language. One reason you need to avoid translating or asking students to translate for you is that students quickly figure out that they don't have to try to get meaning from what you say. It's challenging for students when they have to work to make meaning from what they're hearing in a new language. If students know you'll explain anything they don't understand in English or will translate for them, they probably won't have much reason to work on understanding you when you speak. After all, why work hard if someone will help you avoid all that hard work?
If the teacher consistently uses the target language, learners accept that the target language is and will be the language of communication. Learners recognize that they learn a great deal from this approach.
Every day was just packed with learning, you learn this after another. It's you learn so much in one day.
You're pretty much immersed in the language 24 hours a day.
The reason that I think target language is really important is that for foreign language learners, they actually are not going to learn the language in the original context. They don't have that environment of, language learning. So that's why I think it's very important for teachers to try to create an authentic language environment in the classroom. So I believe the input should be really rich on the teacher's part, or else they didn't get that kind of environment or input outside the classroom. And according to research, actually, maximum target language use really promotes effective learning on the part of the students. So that's why, and it has been working very well for the students. They do feel that more confident, and their learning has been more effective, actually.
For most world language teachers, it is easy to stay in the target language. The key question becomes one of comprehension. Do my students understand the message? For input to be understood, it must be comprehensible. This means that the learner must understand most of what is being said for learning to occur. The input must also be meaningful. Learners must want and need to understand what they are hearing. There are a variety of strategies that teachers use to make language comprehensible. Beginning learners need strong visual support to understand a message, and teachers working with new language learners often use gestures to increase comprehension. Teachers routinely use their hands for emphasis, exaggerate facial expression, act out, or pantomime. The use of gestures captures and holds the interest of the learner while they are actively processing the meaning of the message. Teachers further enhance meaning by using additional visual cues. Props or manipulatives, graphics, realia, images, and multimedia. It is important for teachers to continue to use gestures and other visual cues as learners become more proficient. Visual cues continue to enhance meaning as teachers explain more abstract topics. Consider how Lu Gong makes the language comprehensible throughout this activity. Were you able to figure out the concept that was being taught? With demonstrations, actions, and gestures, the teacher conveyed that living things eat, drink, and grow. Context clues are also important as learners work to understand the message. Learners are likely to have some knowledge about the topics, and teachers can draw on that prior knowledge to make the lesson more comprehensible. In the Portuguese lesson shown here, the teacher has created a visual organizer for the key content words of the lesson: numbers, colors, shapes, and flags. Learners also benefit when they know the purpose of the lesson. At the beginning of the lesson, students hear and see the learning targets for the day. Finally, teachers use the target language to make the target language more comprehensible. As students acquire more language, teachers slow down or simplify their speech, using their voice to place emphasis on key words or ideas. They allow the tone of their voice to match what they are saying, and they paraphrase to make the meaning of new words comprehensible. Using visuals, context clues, and language is not enough to guarantee that the learner will understand the message. The teacher must check often to make sure that learners are understanding what is being said. Watch as teachers use simple checks for understanding with their students.
Because that история, интересная история. Это Кирилл и Мефодий.
Teachers must also ensure that all students have enough time to process the message. Strategies, such as think, pair, share, give all learners a chance to produce language with a partner. The use of language chunks, or sentence frames, allows learners to use new words in a meaningful pattern without moving too quickly from input to output. Based on what you have heard and seen in this video, what advice would you give to a teacher who reported that her students just couldn't understand what she was saying? What would you look for if you had a chance to observe her teaching a lesson? For more information on comprehensible input, see Making Meaning in the Immersion Classroom, Part 1.